everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Hopefully I am unmuted. I can't tell for some reason. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. As you may or may not know, the sentencing was today for Nauman Hussain, who is the limo operator, owner, who was held responsible today for a crash that killed 20 and remains one of the worst highway accidents in the United States. Excuse me. So, yes, I have audio. Perfect. Thank you, Out Loud Trucker. So, welcome. Hello, Bash. And hello, everyone else who may be coming in. Thank you for joining me. So, I am trying something different today with Google Slides. I think I have it so that it's going to play through without me having to change slides. However, this is a learning process, so we'll see how it goes. So as you can see from the first slide, I did change out the photo that I had for an earlier live that I did on this case because it hadn't shown all 20 victims. It only had shown the victims who were in the limousine. So this photo includes all 20 victims, and I just kept the rest of the pictures the same. So what I have today is a video that will sum up the case from a local news affiliate. We then get into parts of the verdict because it was streamed live, which I didn't realize, and it was very long, so I've just taken out bits and pieces that I felt were important. And then the sentencing, which again was about 45 minutes, but I've only included, I believe, maybe 5 minutes. I can't remember. So it shouldn't be too long of a live, which is good because I've got to get ready for the live later. And I think I've found something very interesting to talk about. But getting on with this, right? So again, this is the crash that killed 20 people. And this occurred on October 6th, 2018, which is about 4.5 years ago. So, or no, yes, 4.5 years ago, because it'll be 5 years in October. So it's been a long time coming for these families. And today they were able to gain some semblance of closure. So again, this is from a local news affiliate that gives a summary of the case. And so this is, I found this and I was like, this is perfect because it's going to sum up the case better than I could, because it's going to give you footage from how they covered it through the years.
October 6th, 2018, the deadliest crash the country had seen in 9 years, right here in the capital region. A stretch limo packed for a birthday party lost control, went through an intersection, and crashed in the parking lot of the Apple Barrel Country Store in Schoharie. The severity wasn't made public until the next day, but it was already clear by that evening something very...
Yes, and as I've said before, for those of you who may not know, I grew up about 30 miles north-ish from where the accident site was. And so I remember the day that this happened. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who said, oh my God, you know, like there's this many casualties. And we're like, no, there's not. And there were rumors that one family had lost 3 of their 4 daughters. And we're like, no, that can't be true. It was. So a lot of the speculation and rumors that were floating around our small area actually did come true, which was very sad.
tragic had happened.
This is a two-vehicle, fatalities as a result of this crash. The investigation is very preliminary. It's in its infancy stages. We have several units here investigating.
The next day, police confirmed what everyone had been fearing.
In total, 20 victims were killed. All were adults. 18 of the victims were in the limousine, including the driver and the two pedestrians that were struck. At this time, the identities of the victims are not being released pending the autopsy results and notification of the family members.
Governor Cuomo ordered all flags to be flown at half-staff later that week to remember the victims. In the meantime, investigators tried to figure out what caused the crash. An early theory explored a dangerous intersection and high speed. John Craig reports.
I'm out here at the BOCES camp.
And one thing I will say is I'm not sure I would classify this intersection as dangerous, because I did not too long ago take a drive and I did go to the location of this crash, and it's seemingly not very, I mean, you wouldn't notice it if you didn't know that something so tragic had happened. So I'm not sure I would agree with dangerous, but on this day, it definitely was.
It's just around the corner from where the Apple Barrel is, and where since 8 o'clock this morning, NTSB officials have been there. Now, the Apple Barrel is trying to get back to normal, get back to business if it can, but this may take a long, long time. In the village of Schoharie that seems to turn back the clock to a simpler time, people here wish they could turn back the clock to early Saturday before the fatal accident that took 20 lives. Just outside the village, federal and state investigators are back on the scene. They're in the ditch where the modified 2001 Ford Excursion stretch limousine crashed Saturday afternoon. 18 in the car and 2 bystanders were killed. The NTSB team took measurements and gathered further evidence in the parking lot of the Apple Barrel Country Store. The speed limit in front of the store is 50 miles an hour, which is less than the speed limit on Route 30 that comes down the hill. This is the last posted speed limit, 55.
Right. And so posted speed limits in New York State are 55, or if you're on a highway, 65. And of course, people are going to go faster than the speed limit. Some people don't, but most of us do. And so you can see, I'm not sure if he'll move out of shot a little bit, but there is a descent to the stop sign, which created even more of a terrible circumstance when the brakes failed in this limousine.
On Route 30, before you get to the bottom of the hill, I'll show you. Let's go for a ride. Even though tractor trailers are not allowed on Route 30, there are still those downhill signs. They're posted along with a speed limit of 55. One neighbor we spoke with who...
Wait a minute. So I'm curious. He just said that tractor trailers aren't allowed on Route 30. I have to look into that because I see tractor trailers on Route 30 all the time.
Has lived here all his life, said he thinks the posted signs are fine if people pay attention. But except for the slight curve, it's a straight shot to the T and the fatal intersection. And now, along with the memorial flowers, is this sawhorse with 20 wooden crosses plus pens. The store owners are encouraging mourners to make a mark, leave a message that they hope is the real lasting memory. Now, a couple things with that sawhorse is they've also posted no media signs. What they don't want to have happen is for people that want to have any kind of peace of mind to come down there to be asked any questions, just to come down and pay their respects. We've also learned that there...
And I thought that was an interesting statement by this reporter because, again, this was back in 2018. And now that I'm on this side of the YouTube streets, I feel that's a very important statement to say because, as we know, there are many creators who like to insert themselves into the situations and create havoc. So this is where you have this really small town and they just want to get back to normal at this point and kind of, it's their livelihood. And so I thought that statement was very interesting.
Was a car parked at the bottom of the hill. They saw the limo come over the hill. They thought they'd get hit, but the limo went right around them. We're live in Schoharie this afternoon. John Craig, News Channel 13, Asa, back to you.
All right, new details from John Craig. Thank you, John.
In the meantime, more than 2,000 people gathered in Amsterdam, where most of the victims were from, for the first of many vigils. Emily DeVito reports.
It's terrible to lose one person, and then to have just a car full of people that you love go. I can't even put it into words, to be honest with you.
A community hit by tragedy.
I was lost, but now I'm found.
It was a heartbreaking Monday night in Amsterdam as thousands of people came together for the 20 people killed in Schoharie after an SUV limousine crashed.
The thing with this is that it's whole families have been completely gutted. It's not just one person or something like that. It's literal whole families have been ripped away.
17 of the 20 victims had ties to the Amsterdam area. At the vigil, many people taking the time to remember them, like the 4 King sisters and some of their husbands.
And they were just full of life, daredevils on the ball field. They were just, I don't even know how to say it. Great kids.
The thing is, they're all amazing people, every single one of them. They were kind and big smiles and big hearts.
A co-worker remembering Erin McGowan.
She was a beautiful soul inside and out. She was very sweet, loving. We're missing her very much tonight.
And victim Matthew Kuhn's roommate saying he was family.
I just lost the best friend I've ever had in my life. I've never been my real brother isn't as close to me as Matt was. He was the best person I ever knew.
There were a lot of tears and long embraces at the vigil. Candles were lit, and several state officials speaking to the family members of the victims, encouraging them that they will get through this.
That your strength, that your peace, that void that is in your heart right now will be filled. Your strength will be renewed, and that peace will come back.
But many friends of the victims saying it's difficult to even think about how they'll move forward.
I don't even know. Cry until it's all out of me and then try to just accept it.
Amsterdam School District will be operating on a 1-hour delay today so that staff can be prepared to help any students that are struggling with this tragedy. A community member told me that it's not about people only being there for each other during this vigil, but to make sure that they're with each other for the weeks and months to come. In Amsterdam, Emily DeVito, News Channel 13 today.
We soon got our hands on federal inspection records, which showed big problems the limo had that were allegedly ignored. Dan Levy reports.
Jim, I found out that the limo underwent a thorough roadside inspection just 32 days before that fateful catastrophe. And in those records, after viewing them, some people might be asking, why was the limousine on the road to begin with?
There were red flags that were either ignored or they weren't considered serious enough to keep the limo off the road. According to federal inspection documents posted on a U.S. Department of Transportation website, the fateful limo was cited for 14 violations just 32 days prior to the crash. Albany attorney Lee Kinlan, who represents the Hussain family that owns Prestige Limousine Service, says he believes no one should be playing the blame game before the investigation is over.
And just a side note, because I did not include this in my presentation for today, the state district attorney has requested all maintenance records from Midas Tire, who serviced the vehicle and gave the green light, so to speak. They're going to be investigating and hopefully indicting that business for its role in this crash as well.
Believe in the fullness of time, the investigation is going to show that there were a lot of different factors to this crash, and the state trying to point the finger at one particular thing, 48 to 60 hours after the tragedy is probably a little premature.
Some violations listed on the report have nothing to do with the roadworthiness of the limo. For example, the name of the operator needs to be on display, and the government certification number also needs to be in plain view. The report says they weren't. It also says the limo had been carrying more passengers than the manufacturers engineered it to carry. In addition, the brake malfunction indicator light on the dashboard wasn't working properly, the windshield wipers were defective, and deficiencies uncovered during previous inspections had been ignored. Lee Kinlan says the company is fully complying with the investigation.
Right now, a lot of paperwork. Maintenance records, ownership records, things like that.
We reached out to both state and federal transportation officials today, hoping that they might be able to shine a little light on the inspection records. We didn't hear back from them, guys.
The next day, limo company operator Nauman Hussain was arrested. Karen Terarachi reports.
And a Cobblestone Town Court judge outlined the...
Yes, and he was arrested 4 days after the accident occurred, which would have been October 10th, 2018.
Conditions of his release: he must appear at all future court dates, refrain from committing any crimes, and surrender his U.S. passport.
Wednesday night, Nauman Hussain walked out of Cobleskill Town Court after posting a $150,000 bond. Behind him, his brother and his girlfriend, all three escorted to a white Escalade by Hussain's defense attorney, Lee Kinlan.
Life of my client and his family, I ask that you respect their privacy.
Kinlan says both he and Hussain received threatening emails and phone calls. That is why he says the 28-year-old Prestige limousine operator left his home Wednesday morning.
There's this fear that the address that he typically used and an address that his family has used was starting to be reported, and he felt as if he could be in danger at that house.
According to Schoharie County District Attorney Susan Mallory, Hussain had luggage with him when his car was stopped and he was arrested by New York State Police. But Kinlan maintains his client had no plan to flee the country. His U.S. passport was pending renewal, and he does not have dual citizenship, though he was born in Pakistan.
And we agreed, as an act of good faith, to turn over that passport to show that our client will not go anywhere during the pendency of this case.
Hussain is charged with one count of criminally negligent homicide. Attached to the Class C felony, the 20 names of the victims involved in Saturday's crash in Schoharie.
And just a side note, because I'm not sure if they're going to mention this, Nassam's dad was actually also an owner, the primary owner, and his dad at the time was in Pakistan. Dad never returned to the United States. So Dad made a choice to let the son take the fall. And that is my opinion. I'm alleging that. However, it is a little suspicious when you don't come back home.
A not guilty plea was entered by the judge.
My client, not guilty, does not want sympathy or pity from anybody. He understands that this is the process and it has to take place.
If Hussain is convicted under the current charge, he could be sentenced to up to 4 years in prison. District Attorney Mallory could upgrade the charge, but according to Kinlan, she has assured him a full investigation will take place before any decisions are made. Hussain is scheduled to reappear in court October 23rd at 5 p.m.
That same night, another memorial was held, this time in Schoharie. As the victims were remembered, the first responders at the unimaginable scene were also honored.
That's an honor, because they're here to grieve just as much as we are, and to have every one of them turn around and applaud us is an absolute honor for the devastation that has happened to these families.
Nearly 5 years later, the trial against the limo company operator may be over, but the scars from that day forever changed the Capital Region.
And you can see, so I believe in one of this, maybe not this, there was another one that I was watching that showed the map, which if you go back to my earlier lives, I did show a bunch of maps and different things. You can see where so to the left, the bottom left is where the parking lot of the Apple Barrel restaurant and store was. And then this is the path the limousine took, and it stopped right into that tree where that is just left of that man. Hey, Mona Lisa, good morning.
And they'll remain for years to come. For more News Vaults looking back at big Capital Region events,
well, good afternoon, actually, here in New York, but good morning to you.
Head to our News Channel 13 YouTube page. Opening News Vault 13, I'm Rachel Teedy.
So the next thing I have is remembering the victims. And again, with any case, you have the victims, you have the perpetrators. And in this case, I wanted to reintroduce you to the victims, and I found this, and this is a quick summary of who the victims were, their relation, things like that.
A lot of family members of the victims are inside the courtroom right now for witness testimony. They've been here all day. Again, 20 people died in that horrific crash in 2018. 17 friends in the limo, the driver of that limo, and 2 people who were in that parking lot where the limo crashed. Most of the 17 passengers killed in the tragic crash in Schoharie were part of the same family. 4 sisters from the King family and 3 of their husbands. They were celebrating Amy Steenberg's 30th birthday. Her husband, Axel, worked at Global Foundries. Amy and RN worked at the Justice Center for the Protection of People with Special Needs. Amy's sister Abigail was a special education teacher in Amsterdam. Her husband, Adam Jackson, was deputy commissioner of the Montgomery County Board of Elections. They left behind 2 young daughters. A third sister, Allison King, was also killed, as was their sister Mary Dyson, an Army veteran. She and her husband Rob were engineers working in Watertown with a young son. Her husband's brother, Rich Steenberg, was among those lost in the crash. He had worked at Global Foundries with his brother, Axel. A family friend, Matthew Coons, who had been the groomsman in Amy and Axel's wedding, was also on hand to celebrate. A personal trainer from Fultonville. He'd brought his girlfriend Savannah along with him. She had been an employee at a Johnstown restaurant. Also in the limo that day, Aaron and Shane McGowan. The pair lived in Amsterdam. They had only been married 5 months at the time of the crash. Amanda Halse and her boyfriend, Patrick Cushing, were also heading to the party. Halse was a waitress in Watervliet. Cushing grew up in Amsterdam and worked as a staffer for the state Senate's Technology Services Unit. The crash took place on Michael Ukai's 34th birthday. The Marine Corps veteran lived in Caroga Lake. Amanda Rivenberg was also killed in the crash. She was an employee at Living Resources, an organization focused on providing growth opportunities for people with disabilities. Rachel Cavasi worked as a dental hygienist in Troy. She previously volunteered at a yoga and health center in Massachusetts. Brian Huff and his father-in-law, James Schnurr, were in the parking lot of the Apple Barrel Country Store when they were hit and killed by the limo. Huff was an associate professor at SUNY Oswego. And Scott Lisnecchia of Lake George was driving the limo that day when it crashed. The 20 people who perished in that crash.
Okay, so now that leads up to the verdict. And just a side note, when I was going through, my earlier lives, one thing that I want to point out is that many people were accusing the driver, speculating that he wasn't paying attention, that he, things like that. And in the NTSB report, they stated that he had tried so much to stop that vehicle that the rubber from his shoe was permanently impacted onto the brake pedal. So I actually, going through this, learned a lot more that I didn't know. And so that's why I feel like when you speculate or make assumptions, it's a really dangerous game because you never know until the facts come out, especially during trial. So this is the verdict, which was May 17th. So just actually 2 weeks ago today. And I think I do have almost the entire verdict. And the reason I wanted to keep the verdict is because I found it very honorable that they charged Hussain with a count for each person, and they read the names of each person that was killed in this accident. What's happening here? Why are you not working? All right, hold on, y'all. Something's going on. Okay, so this is so weird. Okay, so let's try this again. So I do have the settings right. It just didn't want to play for some reason. Nope, it's still not wanting to play. What is going on with you? All right, let's try this again. All right, let's try this. Nope. Right, I might need to go to YouTube. All right, well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to just go right to YouTube because my presentation is currently not working. I just need to write the timestamp down. Okay. Here we go.
Of 5 to 15 years in prison. That's the maximum sentence he could face. He could face as little as probation, but however, that's unlikely given the circumstances that led us here, the circumstances that led us to a trial.
We're just hearing a sentencing date has been set for May 31st. That news just coming in from inside the
Oh,
courtroom.
sorry about okay.
125.15.
Okay, sorry about that. It started where I ended, so I had to rewind it.
Subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Savannah Devon Versesi as charged in count 1 listed on the verdict sheet. Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Hold on 1 second. You have to add that it's the charge of manslaughter in the second degree.
So he was being charged with 20 counts of manslaughter in the second degree.
Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.50. In violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Rachel K. Cavosi as charged in count 2 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Matthew William Coons as charged in count 3 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of subsection 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Patrick K. Cushing as charged in count 4 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Mary E. Dyson as charged in count 5 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Robert J. Dyson as charged in count 6 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Amanda D. Halsey as charged in count 7 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Brian Gregory Huff as charged in count 8 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Abigail M. Jackson as charged in count 9 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Adam Jackson as charged in count 10, listed on the verdict sheet. Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Allison A. King as charged in count 11 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Scott Listanikia as charged in count 12 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Erin R. McGowan as charged in count 13 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Shane McGowan as charged in count 14 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Amanda Rose Rivenberg as charged in count 15 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to James Joseph Schnurr as charged in count 16 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Amy L. Steenberg as charged in count 17 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Axel J. Steenberg as charged in count 18 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Richard N. Steenberg Jr. as charged in count 19 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
With respect to the crime of manslaughter in the second degree in violation of section 125.15 subsection 1 of the penal law with regard to Michael Christopher Ukai as charged in count 20 listed on the verdict sheet, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Person, please be seated. Members of the jury, listen to your verdict as it stands recorded. You say through your foreperson that you find the defendant guilty of the crime of manslaughter in the second degree as charged in counts 1 through 20 listed on the verdict sheet. Now collectively, is that your verdict?
Yes.
Does either party wish to have the jury poll? Okay, Mr. Kinley? No. No? Okay.
All right, so we're going to go back here and let's hope that my slideshow works again. So to answer some questions Spudler, so again, these things have been reported, so it's fact. However, I'm not going to say whether or not the driver was at fault. He lost his life, and it's, you don't speak poorly of the dead. So there's a lot of circumstances that happened prior to this accident. And obviously, this is his livelihood. This was his job. Did he know that there were issues with the limousines? Possibly. We don't know because he's not here anymore. according to his wife, he did have concerns. On the day of the crash, he was supposed to drive a different limousine. Just before he was to go pick up his passengers, Hussain swapped out the limousine with the one that actually was involved in the incident. The driver was found to have THC in his system and I believe some type of anxiety medication. But again, nothing that would have impaired his ability to drive to that extent. The driver also, previous to the crash, had pulled over to the side of the road to inspect something. I don't remember exactly what the report said, so I don't want to say it with misspeaking. And passengers in the limousine had been texting friends and family, talking about how noisy the limousine was, and actually making a joke that they hoped they arrived to the brewery alive. So there's a lot. If you're more interested, I have done other live streams on this case, and you can kind of skip around. I have gotten more organized over time, but I did try to keep it, each part was sectioned. But my earlier live, the first live I did, actually has a lot of the news information. The second live I did on this case, excuse me, I was able to get all of the NTSB reports. So I also included that information in the second live that I did on this case. So I hope that answers your question. So Jeannie, the dad was not in the United States at the time of the crash. So I believe they were all co-owners. So Hussain had a brother, and I'm not sure where the brother falls into all of this. I haven't really looked into it, but dad actually ran. This is like a strange, like, talk about suspicious. The dad, before he went to Pakistan, he ran the limousine company out of a room that he rented from a local motel. I actually remember that, but then I had forgotten that fact until I was watching some videos today. Definitely shady. And so dad probably knew, but even more so, I feel like it was Hussain definitely knew, like he was trying to cut corners. However, he was relying on Midas Tire, which they weren't licensed in New York State to service luxury vehicles. So Hussain knew what he was doing was wrong, yet Midas also knew what they were doing was wrong and did it anyways. So I feel like criminally, there's more than just Hussain who should be held responsible. And the civil lawsuits are also starting to be filed now that the trial is over. Hey, True Crime Dime. Yes, and I think I'm caught up. Okay, so let me go back here, and I have to, okay, so it's going to be the next slide.
125.15, subsection 1 of the penal law with regard
to
Savannah.
No. So now it's working. What the heck? This thing is driving me bonkers. So, okay. So anyways, the slideshow is working again. So now this is after the verdict came in, and there's a couple of slides with this where they just talk about, they kind of sum up things, and then there are two short interviews with two different family members that had lost loved ones, and then we'll get into the sentencing.
Very emotional scene inside that courtroom. There were screams as soon as the first count of guilty was announced.
Yeah, from the family members of victims, let out an audible sigh and also a scream from the significant other of Nauman Hussain, who you're seeing here.
We're hearing that the family of Nauman Hussain, his girlfriend, as well as the brother, excused themselves for a short time, emotional as well, leaving the courtroom. The families of the victims, of course, continued to express intense emotion as all 20 names were read, guilty on all 20 counts. Again, sentencing set now for May 31st. Nauman Hussain, very emotional. His brother, at last check, according to our team inside, has been consoling him, trying.
And one thing I also wanted to mention is that they had similar to what happened with the Daybell trial and what's happening now with the Koberger stuff. They had a pool camera, and so WNYT News Channel 13 was the pool camera. They were able to video inside the courtroom, and then once the day's proceedings had concluded, they were able to release it for everyone to see.
To just share some words to comfort him during this life-changing moment for him.
Yeah, the families of victims certainly feeling gratified, I would guess, this afternoon, and we hope to hear from them as they leave the courtroom. But this is not a place that they ever wanted to be, certainly, but they were able to hear all 20 counts read. Now, under the law, there's no difference between 1 count and 20 count, because the maximum...
So I had mentioned this in chat, but this is where I actually did not understand this until I watched this video. So because Hussain was being charged with the incident as one entity, as one event, the most he could be sentenced for was 5 to 15 years in prison. I need to look into why, because I personally feel that each person who lost their life that day should have more worth, I guess to say. 5 to 15 years for causing the death of 20 individuals, I don't think is enough. But that's where I have to look at, the laws in New York and see where change can be made.
Sentence. This is not a stackable or consecutive sentence which will be allowed, because under the law it's viewed as one crime and one crime only. But they get some satisfaction, I'm guessing, by hearing the jury foreperson say guilty to each of the 20 counts associated with each of those 20 names of victims.
Nauman Hussain being placed in handcuffs right now. A live look at what is going on inside the courtroom on your screen right now. Being placed in handcuffs to be led away 4.5 years after this horrific crash, the limousine crash just a couple of miles away from where we are standing right now, that took the lives of those 20 people. The family members have been very quiet throughout this trial, not wanting to speak, saying as soon as there's a resolution, we will speak, and we're hoping to speak with them.
4.5 years since that day, that Saturday afternoon, October 6, 2018, and now someone is being held criminally responsible. Defense attorney Lee Kinlan telling us and telling the jury that there was a rush to arrest. Nauman Hussain was arrested 4 days after the crash, and he was urging the jury not to have a rush to judgment. That's Judge Peter Lynch, who presided over this case, a Supreme Court justice based in Albany, but he came to this case after Schoharie County Court Judge George Bartlett retired.
Okay, so next one.
Nauman Hussain found guilty of 20 counts of manslaughter, and these families have been waiting for 4.5 years for something like this to happen.
The largest highway crash, the most the deadliest highway crash in the United States in more than a decade. And now there is a measure of justice for these 20 families who lost someone on that day.
A large focus of this trial was on Mavis, and Dan Levy broke that news this morning that...
Oh, and I apologize. I misspoke. It wasn't Midas. It was Mavis. So it wasn't Midas Tire. It was Mavis Tire.
State police have been instructed by the Saratoga County DA to turn over any pieces of investigation related to Mavis and the possible involvement that Mavis Discount Tire had in that crash. So things are not done with this investigation. There's still more to come.
Yeah, and perhaps there'll be perhaps the civil cases will move forward as well. But the Mavis aspect was pushed by the defense this week and the week before, saying that it's Mavis who has some criminal responsibility here for not performing the work that Nauman Hussain paid.
Okay. And so now we get into, there's two family interviews.
Kevin, we've been speaking with you throughout the years, and this moment right now, just describe how you're feeling.
It's exhilarating. I mean, we had relatively low expectations because this 4.5 years has been filled with disappointment. But today, we have a reason to be really appreciative of the judge. I can't thank the judge enough for really redoing the plea and having a court trial. And we got a conviction to a charge that we thought was appropriate, and he's convicted. So we couldn't be more pleased about that.
Can you compare your feelings when you arrived at this courthouse on that day in August of last year, thinking that he was going to be sentenced to probation and community service? Compare that to today.
It was an empty feeling. There was anger, frustration, and probably more feelings I can't even put my mind around right now. Today we had expectations, not necessarily low, but after 4.5 years, we don't really have high expectations normally. As it turns out, we're just very, very happy with the court's decision and the jurors' decision. Really appreciate the work they put into it. I know this was a difficult case for everyone involved.
We've been speaking throughout this week, a little bit here and there, and you had mentioned how nervous you have felt, just asking people to pray. And here we are now. This is a guilty verdict. And is it a little sense of closure for you? Is it providing any feeling of comfort?
There's no closure. I mean, it's still, Patrick is part of our daily lives. But, I mean, the court case is over. I guess that's closed. But closure as far as our grief, that's ongoing and forever. And that's okay. I mean, we don't want to forget Patrick in any way, shape, form, or manner, or any of the other family members. We've become a different kind of family. And every child has a story, and we want that story to be told to the next generation. And we will do that during holidays and birthdays and family get-togethers.
We've said throughout that this is a fraternity, a sorority that none of you wanted to be a part of. Mrs. Cushing, did your thoughts immediately go to Patrick?
Yeah, they did. I was shaking and crying at the same time, and it was the right decision, and I felt that way down to my toes. So.
Were you among those who let out a sigh? Where there was an audible sigh in the courtroom. Were you among those?
No, I was not. I was holding everybody's hand around me so tightly, and I couldn't stop crying, basically. And not just for Patrick, but as every name was read.
Yeah. What would you say, Mr. Cushing, what would you say to Nauman Hussain? You'll be given an opportunity on May 31st, I would guess, but do you know what you want to say, or have you thought about it?
Actually, I've kind of thought about the fact that, a $2,000 brake job kind of changed a lot of people's lives. It took the lives of 20 good people and destroyed his. Do the right thing. That's what I almost feel sorry for him. Really? Almost feel so. No one likes to see somebody's life destroyed. And I don't want to feel that way. I mean, I'm certainly glad that he was convicted, and I believe he's getting a punishment that he deserves. But I take no joy in that.
What are the next steps for you now? I mean, this has been such a focal point for the past couple of weeks.
I don't think we've gotten that far.
We are just reeling, I guess is the word, and just trying to find what we're going to do in the next 30 seconds. We're just very...
True enough.
Yeah.
Does the past 4.5 years feel like a haze? Is it?
No, there's all kinds of different things that happened over those 4.5 years that are kind of like markers for us. Generally speaking, they turned out not to be the greatest markers in the world. But things can change, and they did today.
We did get good limo legislation passed.
Yes, you did.
Absolutely. Yeah, at the state level and the federal level. And so that was something that we could really hold on to in the course of the last 4.5 years. That was very productive and hopefully saved other people's lives.
What a tremendous legacy for Patrick and all the
yes,
others.
exactly. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It is nice to see some smiles on your faces. We appreciate you taking a few moments to speak with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have such memory.
Thank you.
Thank you.
House right now.
Jill Richardson Perez is nice enough to join us. She's the mom of Matthew Coons, who died on October 6, 2018. What are you feeling right now, Jill?
Oh, I am feeling a moment of disbelief, but accomplishment. We have waited a long, long time for this day. There was one point in time where we didn't think we'd ever see this day. There was a strong feeling among the parents and the wife.
And just a side note, not to interrupt Mrs. Richardson Perez, before this trial took place, there was another judge, as the newscasters had mentioned, there was another judge on the case who actually made a plea deal with Mr. Hussain that he would be on probation and would be required to perform 1,000 hours of community service. While they were waiting for the motions, the hearings, whatever may be, the judge who initiated and signed off on that plea deal retired. So when he retired, the Supreme Court judge who took over the case. And he said, this is bullcrap. I'm not accepting this plea deal. And he ripped it up. I don't know if he really ripped it up. I'm saying he ripped it up. So Hussain and his lawyer did appeal. And the State Court of Appeals said the action of the lower judge was substantiated. And so he went to trial.
Of those that we lost 4.5 years ago, that there would never be justice. Now we've waited and we've watched, and it's a whole different day. It's a new day. It's the ending of a period, but it's also the beginning of a period for us.
You had mentioned that your plan is to go over to the memorial and then spend time in your son's room when you get home.
Oh, yeah. There are a few parents that are going to the Apple Barrel right now, a small celebration, and then I am really looking forward to going home to my husband. He's been here on and off as he can. He owns a business and he can't be here every day, so I will be there with him, my youngest son. And I want to spend some time with Matthew's things, his military things, his workout gear. I'm so happy we've gotten to this point.
So happy for you. And you said when you go to the Apple Barrel Cafe, where the memorial is, the beautiful memorial with all the stones and the footprints of each of those who were lost, what will you do?
I will do what I always do. I always go there and I go to his stone, he and Savannah's his girlfriend, and they were together in the limo. And I go and I step up and I put my footprints in his footprints. And it brings me closer to him. And he had big, tremendous, huge feet. And I just love
he's a big guy, too.
He was a big boy. And I just love that connection. I look up at the sky and I thank God for the time I had with him here. And I tell him how much I miss him.
Well, just to see you smile and to see that happiness on your face is beautiful. And the connection that all the families have formed through something so horrible, but you all have been there for each other inside that courtroom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone has been there for one another. We text each other back and forth. If someone cannot be there, Amanda Rivenberg's mother was ill this morning, and she texted me and she could not be there. And I know she wants to be there, especially today. So we're there for one another. We're there for Amanda, always.
Jill, thank you very much for speaking with us on this day of joy, finally, on some level.
Congratulations on the legacy of Matthew, because you have advocated on his behalf for greater safety for limousines, and that's been successful.
We have. Thank you, and thank you so much for being there for us today.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Jill Richardson Perez taking time out of her day now, time out from a celebration as much as you can celebrate on this day. But thank you.
Okay, so now we get to this morning, which was sentencing. All right, thanks for stopping in, Ella Trucker. Yeah, I agree, Blonde Fox. It was definitely shady, and I mean, just it didn't have to happen, and that's, usually the most tragic thing. A lot of these things don't need to happen, and yeah. So again, today was sentencing. So I'm not sure. I don't think this is a very long video, because the sentencing, it was like really long. They have to go over like the procedural stuff. So I only clipped some of it because I really liked this judge, like I said before, because when he read the charges, he went through and named every single victim and the sentence imposed. But again, in New York State, because it was charged as a single event, the most that Hussain could be sentenced to is 5 to 15 years in prison.
After the conviction under count 20 of the indictment for manslaughter in the second degree for causing the death of Michael Yukaj, it's the judgment of this court that the defendant be sentenced to an indeterminate term of imprisonment with a maximum of 15 years and a minimum of 5 years. By operation of law, those indeterminate terms of imprisonment are to run concurrently for an aggregate indeterminate term of imprisonment with a maximum of 15 years and a minimum of 5 years. The court will impose the mandatory surcharge of $300, a $25 crime victim fee, and a $50 DNA database fee, which, if not paid, will be deducted from inmate funds. Now, Mr. Kinlan, I'm directing you, as I'm sure you will, to file timely a written notice of appeal to preserve your client's appellate rights. With that said, I remain the defendant to the custody of the Schoharie County Sheriff for processing for purposes of being turned over to the New York State Department of Corrections. Defendant is remanded. And that concludes today's proceedings. Thank you all.
All right, and that is the end of my presentation. Hey, Kathy, I was just writing hi to you, but I'll say hi since my slideshow ended. So a bittersweet ending to a very long process, 4.5 years in the making. He will be serving 5 to 15 years in state prison. And I will keep up with this. I have signed up for email alerts through a local newspaper just about this case. I get updates as things happen. So if anything does happen, I will probably either do a short video and post it, or I would just post it on my community page. So I want to thank all of you for being here. It's much appreciated, and I hope I was able to give some insight on a really, really sad case that means a lot to me, because like I said, I grew up not too far from excuse me, where this happened. So I will be back later today I'm going to get some things done, and I am getting my slideshow ready for that. If you haven't voted yet or answered my poll, I did put a poll on my community page to see what we should talk about today at 4:45. Bestie did go live, but it was boring, and she said the same stuff she said yesterday, pretty much. So, and her internet audio was awful because, of course, she was driving while streaming, reading chat. So, the options are to either go over one of Betty's older lives, an unsolved case, a missing person case, or if you have another suggestion, you can comment in the comment section. So Kathy, that according to New York state law, because the prosecution was, okay, let me back up. Because it was a single event, it could only be charged as a single event. So he wasn't charged with each death. He was charged with the single event. And based on New York state law, in second-degree manslaughter, it is a minimum of 5 years, maximum of 15 years in state prison. So that is where laws need to change, because I agree with you. He was responsible in part for 20 lives being cut very short, and to not even get 20 years seems very much an insult to those lives that were lost. So in any case, I'm going to go get some food. I will see some of you later. And until next time, y'all, I will see you on the flip side.